Hello, everybody, and welcome to our world today, the Unionist perspective. For today's conversation, we are going to have a recap of this year in review. So many things have happened, so many pieces of healing that has come up. There's been very interesting topics and some very surprising topics as well. And so for today, we're going to just take our year in review and explore some of the lessons that have been learned over the year. So I'd like to open up to the team and check in with you. What do you believe was our primary lesson in what has happened in the world this year?
Hello, everyone. I wanted to run down the list and give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So, our word of the year is authenticity, and we're going to speak about how we feel about authenticity, especially related to AI and what's been developing these last few years. And then we'll speak about the economics and see how that makes us feel about the recession not happening and there being a crisis in resources as well as oil. And that leads us to the Russia and Ukraine conflict, as well as Israel and Hamas conflict, and North Korea and China's conflict. We're gonna dive deep and see what can be the solutions for these conflicts. And also, we're going to go back to the US and talk about the US gun violence debate and recent school shootings and see how that reflects in our consciousness and how that reflects in other countries such as Turkey or Argentina. We will also speak about religion and how the Pope's actions are reflecting on blessing the LGBTQ group and how that's evolving. And we will touch on India's religious divide as well as Israel and Hamas war and see how that is also showing through in our consciousness and what could be the solution for that. And we can relate with the marriage trends and self isolation and see how that's related in our consciousness as well. So, a lot of deep healing and a lot of things to discuss with you.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. So, as we said, the Merriam-Webster dictionary elected a word for this year, and surprisingly, it was authenticity. And I think a lot of people in the midst of like AI and a lot of digital eras that we've passed for the past few years are seeking more authenticity and maybe some more connection as well. And we're going to see like how that ties up for humanity. But before we do that, let's talk about AI and how it evolved this year. Not really a debate on ethics and why AI develops so much and how and who benefits it, but mostly like positive things that happen through AI and negative things that happen through AI and how we can improve because obviously it's not going to go away, but we as human beings shape what is going to happen with the algorithms and with artificial intelligence. So that's mostly what we can discuss and start to change right now. Open floor. What do you guys think?
Yeah, isn't it cool that authenticity was selected as the word of the year, by Merriam-Webster? And they said like when they select these, it's because it was one of the most highly searched words, or like there was like a huge uptick or increase in searches for the word of the year. But I think they also choose it because they feel like it really resonates with like the theme of the year too. So maybe it wasn't like the most searched word of the whole year, but it, it's just a big theme. And I feel like that makes a lot of sense, because like people are trying to find themselves, right, in the wake of like COVID happening. Like we've talked about it so many times how COVID was a time of like isolation for a lot of people, which some people see as, being a negative thing or possibly feel scary, but it's seen as a positive thing, like because it's an opportunity, right? In the unionism, and Jeff and Shaleia did a sermon about that way back in 2020, where they said something like COVID is actually a blessing. I think that was in the title of the sermon. And they said that it was because it helps you be more inward focusing and reflect on yourself. And I think that that makes sense because the pandemic is past us this year, and but people might have like started to venture out again into like, I don't know, social settings and everything. And maybe they're like, okay, life's getting back to normal, but then people are like, yeah, but like, what is this normal? Like, do we actually want to keep relating the same way, or do we want to try to become, like we were saying, like more authentic, So I think that's cool. And I think like, we've seen so many stories about AI this year too. So people using AI to like present some sort of image to people, like, oh, students are using AI to write their papers. There's an arms race between the students and AI, and then professors and teachers trying to detect the AI to see if their paper is authentic work of the student, right? There's people using Chat GPT to create, like, have a conversation with someone they're trying to flirt with, like, so Flirt GPT thing, there was the AI generated picture of the Pope in this really nice puffer jacket, which it would be cool if he actually got a jacket like that, because like it was really good style for him, these deep fakes coming out, so the images generated that seem real, but they're not. So it seems like a big year. But to me, my feeling about this year though is that it wasn't like these massive watershed events happened. It was more just like slow changes coming in, like adding ingredients to a soup, and like the soup is kind of simmering. And maybe next year there will be more like watershed events, uh compared to this year, whereas like this year was like a development of some big stuff that had happened, like in 2022, yeah, and earlier. So I don't know, what do you guys think of all of that?
Yeah, I get you. There's definitely something about artists and their work being stolen at first or copied from photos. And obviously, like, this doesn't feel good. But the algorithm quickly changed to adapt and completely differentiate from artists, and adding artists into their catalogs and saying like, hey, we don't want to just have this copied. We want to have other styles. We want to have things that are completely created. But I think it's just there's something about it that feels like it's just exactly what humans are doing. They're just like, how new songs are like sampling of basically the same 12 notes that everyone uses. And people are just trying to figure out like what's their sound and how it's used. And obviously like there's a lot of like laws and ethics to come towards that. And it was good that we saw with like the whole drama throughout like the founder of ChatGPT and the firing and reinstating that it was actually doing a lot of things for the AI community to just be progress more and be more open and be more ethical. And I think that was like we had a little bit of a scare at first, and that was good afterwards. And the fact that what we retain from AI is actually, if not a bit annoying for teachers to read papers, all the same. because my students do that too. If not like, funny and instating connections. The Pope in like a puffer jacket or things like that. And I think like everything, people use AI to do good and they use AI to do bad. And I don't think like the instrument is the one at fault. It's just like humans and what they do with it that need to always change. And so we mustn't be rendered powerless by the explosion of technology. I think we should use it in order to create our explosion of our own creativity because we are creative beings. I think that's what I would like to just say about it. Any other words about it before we go into the next stuff?
So I think it's quite interesting that in a year where AI and authenticity has become quite a almost clickbaity trend thing, we see the opposite of what we perceived last year, with lots of people complaining about the styling of algorithms, and now those algorithms tend to profile you in some way or another to present certain things to you because of your profile. So it's kind of like this almost almost a complete flip where people were complaining about seeing racially typed content because of algorithms to people now accepting the algorithms that are driving AI and appreciating the content that is being given to them through these algorithms via AI. So there's a big shift. I feel like there's also been a big shift in terms of, while authenticity is not a new thing, that shift to asking for more authenticity has literally come through in just about every topic we've had, with people questioning the motives of political leaders, of military leaders, the motives of some very big companies in terms of their policies, the motives of people deriving various movements in financial markets, in Bitcoin, in trading. So all of those kind of things have all been underpinned by people looking for a lot more realness. And we knew it was going to come. It's not that we didn't foresee this. We've known for the last almost 3 years that people are searching for more realness in their lives after COVID made them pay attention to themselves. And it would kind of be remiss if authenticity wasn't the Merriam-Webster Word of the Year, because we almost feel we've seen it so many times in people just questioning things at a much more in-depth level, because the search has been for stability for at least 18 months post-COVID. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening. There was a lot of search for authenticity and how banks in China were trading and providing mortgage loans, and the construction industry, and how those banks were funding the construction companies. So there's been a lot of stuff. We've also seen a big shift in what has been inflation amongst lots of countries, even though there's a perception that recession may have been avoided. I can't say that I completely agree with it. It might just have dressed itself in different clothes, but I still believe that there was a level of recession.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit more on authenticity because when I feel into it, I feel like your authentic self is your true divine self. And I think that's important that we're going through this little stage or long stage of finding authenticity through AI and what's going on. Because I know for me, like I have to heal through a lot of like imposter syndrome. And I'm sure, like, as we're awakening, we're recognizing our own power and our own divinity. And with AI coming out, it kind of shows us how powerful we are as creators. And that's where kind of that swing comes of like using it and being super codependent on it, to flirt for us and this and that, because we become so dependent on the creation instead of the creator. And we don't really recognize our own authentic intuition and our own uniqueness.
Yeah, it feels like value is coming back to like what's real and authentic is like being more valued through like what we've seen and what we're going through. So, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I feel like too, one thing I've been thinking of is I recently watched a life purpose class. One of the classes, from Jeff and Shaleia about like living your purpose, and they addressed this exact issue of the authenticity of art, or if it was made by AI or stolen from artists. And they said, like, even if somebody else were to completely replicate something that you made, it wouldn't be the same thing because it's not from you. Like, if it has you in it, like you created it, it has your unique, I don't know, essence or energy in it, then it's like, yeah, it's valuable. It's like uniquely valuable because you created it. And no matter what we decide about the ethics of AI and AI art, I feel like that's the lesson, because people were saying like, oh, artists are being like replaced, and that's their upset is they feel like they're replaceable, right? And it's like, well, no, you're not. Like your value is inherent and it can't be taken away, because no computer can make it like you can make it, even if it copies every little pixel of detail. It doesn't have the essence in it, and that's what people need to know. Now, maybe we might want to regulate it or as a society, or maybe not, or whatever, but like that would be the spiritual component. You know what I mean? Of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. That's definitely it. That's just like it's irreplaceable. We do see how stuff is made with AI and what humans continue to create, and they continue to innovate, and they continue to add their style and own touch and essence to something. And I think it shows, like you can see it in everything. But so we're going to jump into the next chapter of our discussion, which is economics. And Granville touched upon it a little bit when he said that he doesn't think that recession actually didn't happen. I think the global recession didn't happen, or maybe it didn't happen the way um, people in the financial spheres felt it would happen. Much like they didn't think that China wasn't going to get back on its feet after COVID. So again, like with predictions with economics, like we're never going to be 100% sure what happens. But there is definitely a crisis in terms of resources that is making some of the economy slow down. And there are questions about like where to find oil. Do we have to open back the market with Venezuela? Things like that. I don't want to go too deep into like economics tonight because we don't have time to explain it, but to the feeling of the economy at this time and what it needs to shift, what would that be for you guys?
Well, I
I
think,
think
just as you said, that yes, we don't believe that the recession has happened in a global scale, on a global scale, the way we believe that the way it was predicted to or not predicted to happen. I think one of the challenges that we have to consider is at an individual level in most countries. The standard of living has changed because the cost of living has changed. So people's buying power has shifted as a result of goods becoming much more expensive. And so the buck that they had to spend is going at a much shorter to a much shorter distance than it would have, which has definitely created a level of recession at individual level. In South Africa, we've had 11 interest rate hikes. That means that it not only is it more difficult to service, to provide for your family and your house, it's also much more complicated to service your debt because the cost of debt is more expensive. So the challenge is that at an individual level, people might be treading water, but if you look at what is happening, that treading water picture is very almost calm on the surface, but underneath it's a shitload of paddling to just stay afloat. And we need to honor people's experience of what is happening economically at this time and understand that something does need to give, because you can't pedal at that rate and not eventually develop various cramps in various places.
Yeah, I think it's related to authenticity as well, because we have just layers upon layers of debt. And is in spiritual teachings, when you have debt, it's like there's multiple relations to it, but one relationship you can make is like when you don't show up as your true authentic self, you're putting a debt into yourself. So I feel the economic system that's going on right now, it's like perpetual to fail, because you're trying to borrow so much money in order to make, real estate, this, that, and other, and pay off debt, when not building a strong foundation of integrity and of a system that would be, trustworthy. So I think it's very related to what the economy is going through and what people are searching and within themselves.
Yeah, like throughout the year, that's been a theme that we have seen, right? Like you were saying, it's like it's about authenticity, because it's like in certain ways the economy is being maybe like overvalued or like valued based on the fact that everybody's really excited, and it's called speculation, right? Like people buying like financial assets or whatever, these like ridiculously complex like financial assets, the hedge fund company, the private equity company that like makes a company, buys companies, makes them, strips them down, makes them really crappy so that the costs are lower, and then like sells the company off at a profit or that kind of thing. Like that's, private equity has been on the rise, so like these companies make a lot of money from buying companies and stripping them down and selling them because now they're more profitable. And yeah, that was one thing we discussed previously, was that if the economy had, if there had been more investment in like the actual productive capacity of the economy, like help the economy create more value for people instead of like trading or like speculating or this kind of thing. And that's what we've seen with housing prices too, right? They becoming more and more a speculative asset. They have been, then that creates like inflation in the economy, but without actually like, you know, helping increase our like standard of living basically. And it's like a lot more complicated than that, but I feel like that is the basis of it, like what you said, like invest in providing value for people and don't, yeah, it shouldn't all just be like speculation. And that we saw that in a more obvious way with China, right? Where their real estate market was like way overvalued, but a lot of the companies like didn't even, because they wanted to keep building and expanding like in a greedy way, they like took from their foundation. They didn't even have the money to pay people back, right? I mean, I'm sorry, they didn't even have money to complete the apartments that people were already paying for. Sorry. So people stopped paying their mortgages, and we saw that this year in China. So I thought that was interesting, but I don't know though if or how people will resolve it in the coming year, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely, we're going to see, because I do feel like it's definitely felt in Europe where national systems are peddling to, because just like the price of resources for construction and the price of resources for heat and gas are just not where they used to be. And because our winter is so much harsher than last year, even if it's still like hotter than usual, it's being felt. So I think there is something about national systems reacting as well, but we'll have to see. I don't think it's just individuals. I think it's the illusion making us feel like there is a new normal, but I don't think it is a new normal. I think there is definitely too much into the speculation systems. It's like we're talking like hundreds of billions of dollars in the speculation systems, which means like not real value, where a lot of the money is, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the explanation of things. So there's definitely something. It's probably one of those topics out of all that we're going to talk about tonight, where there is something where it's like we're just feeling like there's real change because the energy is feeling a little bit stale, maybe a little bit cold. But yeah, that's the economy for us. It's there is a need for a change, but I think the change will be brought on by other events, or like just like one of the big systems like cracking down and saying like, hey, I can't support it at this rate anymore. Because we're not ready to change right now, but there is a change that's going to be needing to happen if we don't want to go into like a slow but very definite crisis, as Grenville was kind of like portraying, with people like kind of struggling underwater, undercurrent. So yeah, and linked to that, I think there's definitely something to say about the relationship between countries, and sadly the main conflicts that were in the relationships between countries. We're going to present them, introduce them again, because we've done a lot of that this year. But Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, or the relationships of China with the world and North Korea with the world. Globally, without entering into the details of each of the conflicts, what do we feel needs to change in 2024 for the situation to actually change? And maybe we don't have answers, that's okay, but what's the feeling there? about this conflict?
Maybe in 2024, like some of the tyranny that has been practiced by some countries, like Russia and China, will be like, they won't be able to sustain it, because like it's been a war of attrition for Russia and Ukraine, and their economy's been, really under strain, and China's economy has been under strain, so they may not, some people believe that China would never be able to invade Taiwan in the future because there's no way that their economy could take it. Their economy's already like basically receding. So maybe 2024 we'll see the breaking point for some tyrannical regimes, like, because they're like, it becomes clear, like, okay, like we absolutely, like, we can't sustain this, or I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there definitely needs to be a breaking point of some sort. I think probably we need to get better at boundaries too.
Yeah, because everyone was still working on that, like being like, getting clear on like, do you want to do business with like Russia or not? Like, do you want to like allow these things or not? Yeah.
How is Russia's economy doing? Because I feel like even if they're down to like pennies, they're still so gung ho about, you know.
No, maybe, but it's more like, just like China, it's more like they're big in numbers
Mm.
and they're big countries. And adding to the fact that it is a country on the first side, the effect is going to be felt way later than we think.
And I think that's what the bigger challenge is that although all of these conflicts are happening that have an impact on the economies, have an impact on the relationships with other countries, the impact is not felt immediately, and that's probably part of the reason why some of these things are so protracted, because they're not feeling immediate pain. So for them, they are serving whatever unusual immediate need they have. And the challenge, obviously, is that it seems like there is a choice of insanity in all of these conflicts that we keep on being drawn to point out, as opposed to being drawn to the insanity itself. And it literally comes back down to something that has been topical for many years, and that's in reflecting what an individual's sovereignty would be. This is kind of reflecting that sense of respect of countries' sovereignty. There still seems to be, to me, a layer required in terms of accepting and respecting somebody else's humanity. And so you find that by the reflection of these complex consciousnesses of countries, it's still underlying, it's almost still underpinning or pointing to the choice to have your power and to not give away your power and to not have your power disrespected, and also under certain circumstances to exercise your power in a way that makes people pay attention. And I think we spoke about it very much at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in terms of the narcissistic abuser that will continue to be abusive until the boundary is set, until you tell the abusive ex or whatever it may be to stop their crap. And so I think there's a much stronger requirement for these boundaries that seem to be perceptive boundaries to become much stronger boundaries from very many countries around the world. Literally, we had a situation of hundreds of countries walking out of UN Security Council votes and those kind of things to actually highlight how much they do not support those kind of conflicts. And so again, we're finding it over and over and over that in that space of authenticity, you can't just make a choice of having a boundary. You need to have the action steps following through on saying this is where it ends, this is where it stops. And I don't believe that globally we have been as forceful about enforcing those boundaries as probably needed to be. So, it's literally telling a naughty child, no, 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 no. But if mommy and daddy don't act on the no, the behavior extends further.
How do you guys think the world is doing at learning that? Like learning that you've got to have boundaries and like what is tolerable and what's not, with these like different countries.
I feel we're getting a lot better, especially with the new judgment on gun violence and the life sentence that someone had when they had a school shooting. That just came to mind when we're speaking about boundaries and conflict between countries. I'm really glad that there's a new boundary being drawn about that not being okay because of the absurd number of school shootings that we have.
I think we are getting better. But like as you said before, since it's such we're not in a system where there was like accountability for people enough for them to like be recognized for their patterns. I think it may need a little bit more time before we have something that is peaceful and the chaos is like completely flushed out. And I think we shouldn't judge how the chaos is flushed out. It may not be pretty, I think. It's either going to be peaceful or not. So yeah. Yeah. How do you guys feel about moving on to internal affairs? I think we got through a lot of elections this year. Elections, a lot of like people that were put into power in extreme way, or maybe not. But I think we could focus on like the US shooting rate and how the trial that has happened may speak to like a change in consciousness. So how do you feel? How do these things speak to like what the people are actually choosing? Nadia, do you have an insight?
Yeah, I think like it is both very related. Like in a very internal way, we are like showing improvements and boundaries. But when it comes to like huge relationships and putting boundaries in countries and saying no to supporting a country that is, abusing another, for some reason we find it a lot harder to do compared to, of course, our internal issues. And that's, I guess, explainable or understandable because we first have to go through the layers of like what, the lowest hanging fruit. And I think the way I'm feeling, the way I'm seeing it, that's what we're doing. We're getting the lowest hanging fruit developing our boundary powers so that we can stand up for, Russia, Ukraine, Hamas and Israel, China, North Korea. Uh, Although it may seem like a bigger scale, it's the same thing. It's just that we have to address it regardless.
And on the count of like the trial on the school shooting, like how does it feel as well?
I feel good about it because it definitely sends a message that this is not okay, this is not tolerable, and it's come too far. And like it should not have come to this point where there's so much school shootings that now there's a life sentence for it. And I really appreciate the response that the shooter had made, that like he knows he was in the wrong. And that's like the best thing. Like when you are like, if you see it in like Jesus's eyes, like if you have sinned and you have repented, like that's the best out of everything. So to continue to purify your consciousness in that way is wonderful.
Yeah, I think like, the world is every country and also the world as a whole. Like we see it as a really complex individual. And so, there's like parts of the consciousness, there might be like really good boundaries, maybe like with ego, basically, or like whatever you want to call it, like fear or whatever, illusion. And yeah, like we would see that with like that sentencing that happened in Michigan recently. In other parts of the consciousness, like there's maybe not as good boundaries, or like people are just still really kind of figuring it out. I think in the US, there's like, well, gun violence is still very much not figured out in the US at all. Like overall, like it's very much not. And it's one of our like stickiest issues, like one of the densest illusions that we have to heal through, but we will eventually. Two other things in the US where we aren't really sure what our boundaries should be, or like what's good or what's bad. Number one, like throughout the year, with all the trials of like Donald Trump and everything, like that was a major thing that like just kept developing, and the news cycles were always filled with more updates about that, all the little minutiae of that. And the country is very much like, I feel, not really decided about like should he even be allowed to run again in 2024 with like the kinds of crimes that he committed. Did he even commit all of these crimes? Like, can we even hold him accountable? How does this work? So people are still hashing that out, and like what kind of boundaries can you draw with someone who used to hold that office of president? Or so that's very new, and we've been processing that. And also with, I guess, LGBTQ rights, like, there were like some bans on like drag performances in like some states, and bans on like children doing like puberty blockers or hormone therapy if they're transgender, or like things like that, or usage of pronouns that they prefer, whatever, in the classroom. And so people are hashing that out and being like, oh my gosh, what can a kid decide for themselves? Like, what is appropriate, what isn't? And like a lot of courts have, within the states where the bans happened, a lot of courts have like suspended them, and so that's just been like a whole debate that's kind of just simmering and just ongoing. So yeah, so we're still deciding that. And there's a few countries where there was like, appears to be some sort of change, although it might really be an illusion, like the Netherlands choosing a far-right person, reacting against like immigration, cultural change, and then Argentina choosing Malay, who's like kind of a libertarian in Argentinian terms though. And wants to like dollarize the economy. Like some shows have maybe pseudo changed. Others, we remember like in Turkey, there's that big earthquake. Erdogan had a hand in the bad construction, all the buildings collapsing, you know, in the earthquake, but he won again anyway, you know, in the election, assuming it was a fair election, maybe, I don't know, but it's hard to say with like a dictatorship, authoritarian, sorry. But that seemed to be like, no, people were not ready, would not be ready to like question him. He represents something that they care more about than, you know, other things. So yeah, I don't know. So yeah, do you guys have anything else about like what happened within certain countries, and are they changing or not changing?
So I
Yeah.
don't think the primary question is around whether they're changing or not. I feel like that we have seen shifts in the consciousness of nations, and we have seen countless countries choosing forerunners in the political sphere that wouldn't have been their natural choices. Well, we wouldn't have naturally assumed that those were the choices. And what has happened is there's been our conversation over the year has stemmed a lot from, is there actually a shift in that nation's consciousness or not? And we have seen certain shifts. We're not fully certain about what those shifts mean for those political spheres right now, because we haven't had the opportunity to see those people in action. But we have seen significant requests for change, significant requests for greater support of almost the masses in countries that may have before not been at the forefront. In South Africa, we're seeing a greater call for coalitions because of the fact that we don't have tripartite or bipartite political systems. We literally have countless little spin-off political parties almost dividing the vote, which means that where there's a requirement for stronger opposition to certain political decisions or behavior, it's not always as well supported as it needs to. And I think that's really the thing. In order for there to be a greater level of stability, there has to be a greater level of debate to ensure that the right things are being considered and placed on the table and hopefully followed through on. What we're seeing is a lot of shift in terms of countries saying, we want something new. And so picking that something new, but we haven't really had the opportunity to see that something new in action completely. And it will take a while because, again, those political systems take a while for those results to start coming through and for people to then appreciate that the shift has happened or not happened. So I feel like it's still early days, but I do believe that there's definitely a call for a shift amongst many nations.
I think if there is a choice, if any, that we can decipher, and I thank you, Sage, for like going into details about what's going on in terms of internal affairs for all of these. I think it's like the processing of truth, like wanting to find the truth and also wanting to know how to find this truth. Maybe sometimes we go into like extreme measures or people because we feel like it's a solution, and because we're taught to act before we can feel it. But there is definitely something that we I think we can see the process of like people actually wanting to find truth and or stay in insane choices. But it's two sides of the same coin. Like there is definitely something that is shifting, and we can attest to that. That's one choice that we can definitely see. And yeah, so do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, when we were talking, when Granville mentioned South Africa too, it reminded me just briefly, like this year was a big year of political change on the African continent too, right? Because in so many countries, like maybe around a dozen or close to a dozen, there were these coups, right? And many countries had partnerships with France, right? And so they're like it's a former colonial power, and they were saying there was an upsurge of feelings of like just like not wanting to be involved with France and not wanting to partner with them, right? And not wanting to partner with the Western countries to increase security in Africa, in the Sahel region, right? And so many countries that happened. That was interesting. And a lot more countries became more involved with Russia, seeing Russia as being like anti-colonial. And yeah, it was just like an interesting year for Africa. We talked about like Senegal experiencing some moves toward authoritarianism where it used to be seen as like stable and safer and freer country. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo, like being like, we don't want UN peacekeeping troops, right? Dealing with the insurgencies in the east of the country. And maybe there's just people are getting clear what it means to be independent, and also getting clear on their relationships. Like, do these countries love us? Are they loving us? Is it a good partnership? Or is this country a more loving choice for us to partner with? Or what does it look like for us to be really independent, and what's the real solution to the challenges we're facing? Like that was like a big trend, for Africa.
Yeah. And I like that. I like that we can see all the parallels with everything that we've said since the beginning. Like at all levels, everyone is like thinking about how to be more authentic and the best way forward for them. And obviously, the best way forward for them sometimes feels messy for a lot of people and looks messy. And sometimes other people know that it's not the right solution, but maybe it's a time of exploration and sadly contrast for some people. But like all the same, like it's all going to come to choices of peace, hopefully. And I think one person which represents like a whole movement and culture that is always making decisions towards the truth and like recognizing things is the Pope. And we've seen and recognized LGBTQ unions this year, and also apologize like never before and meet with First Nations people and leaders in order to actually recognize the atrocities of the Catholic school in North America. And I think it's a huge deal. I think there's a change here for him as well. Don't want to focus too much on him because it feels like just like any of the other countries, he's a representative of one country as well as one religion. So it feels like he also was in the search of like what feels good. It's still in the search of like what feels good and what is true and what is still aligned with his values and love. But I want to just like, while I mentioned that, I want to mention like how people feel they relate to religion right now and why it's changed. Maybe like, how do you feel people relate to religion, and what would be a solution to that? I almost want to say devaluation of religious status in their life, the religious culture. In like the 4 minutes that we have left.
So again, I think it's about a shift and about perceiving the real connection. And so with the Pope starting to speak to some of these more real life circumstances and accepting that that there are spectrums of life and almost respecting them a little bit more, there's definitely a shift in how people will start to engage with religion because they feel seen, they feel recognized, and in certain respects, they will feel more loved by various religious components or almost connections. So they are gonna engage with religion probably in a more healthy way because they feel like they are being seen. And the minute that you recognize somebody's individuality, their sovereignty, it's a much healthier way to not only start to build relationships, but to cement those relationships. So I definitely believe that there will be a change in the levels of engagement with religion because of the fact that my sense of belonging, my individuality, my truth is being recognized.
Any last words? Or do you
Yeah,
feel like,
it seems like yeah, it's about like people feeling issues with the hierarchy or like the religious leadership and stuff, and that's where a lot of the disaffection comes from, like abuse scandals or whatever. Basically, the relationship not being repaired and the problems not being addressed, but at least with the Pope, it looks like that's happening, and yeah, at least beginning to happen. Mhm.
I did want to mention some great changes we explored in El Salvador, and I look forward to seeing the changes in the coming year with their drastic crime rate going down. I know it's not related to religion, but yeah.
yeah, I look forward to seeing it maybe in a less authoritarian way that it has been and how it works. Yeah, and maybe like since we're opening up on 2024, I look forward to seeing a conclusion to the uncertainty about conflicts in a few parts of the world. I look forward to social issues like mass shootings and racism actually being addressed. And so because I look forward to these two things being done, I think I look forward more to people actually knowing how to stand for themselves and how to have actual boundaries that yields actual results. So yeah, that will be my wish for 2024. But again, we'll have to see where it takes us, and we'll only have to discuss how it feels to us and what's the spiritual truth of people's choices behind it.
Awesomeness. And on that note, thank you to everybody for the conversation. Thank you to the people that have been following us throughout the year and the various years in the evolution of our conversation. So also please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous live content. And we wish you a very happy new year. So thank you, everybody. See you in the new year. Bye-bye.
Bye.